From FLX1.com, welcome to another edition of the Inside the FLX podcast. I'm Josh Durso. This week we are one-on-one with New York Wine Industry Association President Erica Policelli. Erica, certainly appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start first things first. What is the Wine Industry Association? What is that and where did it come from?
Sure. So the New York Wine Industry Association actually represents all of New York State's wineries and grape growers, wine grape growers, I should say. And, I have been a part of it for the last 10 years since we opened the winery. I'm also part of Three Brothers Wineries in Geneva, New York. But it was put in place generally because there is no industry advocate for any kind of legislation that may arise over the years that would affect our industry. So, the New York Wine and Grape Foundation does a lot for our industry, but they can't advocate for us, in Albany so much. So we were put together as a group of passionate, when I came on board, it was a small group of passionate business owners. They really wanted to have their own voice legislatively. So that's kind of why it was put together. That's still what we do today. We just got back from Albany about 2 weeks ago. We went to Albany on a Monday, and all of us, we went into the legislative office building in the Well. We held a large event where was our biggest turnout. We probably had 100 legislators show up, senators and assemblymen and their staff. And we just sampled out New York wine to them. And we were great, some of the creameries in the area were gracious enough to send some cheese. Dinosaur Barbecue was there giving out little mini sliders, but we were present there. And so we had a list of talking points that we brought with us. We talked about things that matter to us at the moment. And we had the ears of our senators and assemblymen and women that we wouldn't otherwise have unless we kind of formally got together and did that. That's a great event. A group of us stay overnight, and then the following day we lobby. So we actually have appointments all day long. We split it into teams, and we go directly to the offices and we talk to these people and we tell them from our perspective where we stand, because a lot of the legislation right now that we're talking about is coming from downstate. So they don't necessarily understand where we're at as grape growers and farmers in upstate New York. And so it's important for us to try to explain things from our perspective. So it's a perfect example of why we are the New York Wine Industry Association, what we do. That's our annual kind of big event. It always happens in May. But other than that, we get together once a month. We have meetings and we talk about, we're in a different time right now, and every senator and assembly person that you talk to, they'll tell you bills are coming out faster than they can keep up with them. And so it's important that you have someone's kind of ear to the ground. So we have a legislative committee that has been doing tremendous work to keep everyone abreast of what's important. And we're able to come out with a statement that we feel represents the industry's, best. We have our best intentions of the industry, in mind with our blanket statements that we make for NIWEA. So we'll contact our legislators, we'll call down state, we'll organize more of an effort to get our voice heard.
Mm-hmm. And sort of this hybrid between the ag industry and then the tourism industry. Talk to us a little bit about just what the advocacy that you guys really have to do says about the growth of the tourism industry in the last 5 to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years.
Right. So, we have some leverage because we are one of the only industries in New York State that is growing, and so that helps us a lot. But with that, we kind of have, a target a little bit because people want to regulate. There's a lot happening, but we have wine, beer, all the other craft beverages, cider, and we have spirits, and there's this huge craft beverage industry as a whole, which we do communicate with those other organizations too. And so on issues that we're united, that is even better because then we can come out as a whole craft beverage industry. It's important now more than ever because they're just, like I said, there's just so many bills coming out so quickly. It's a rapid thing that you have to keep up with.
Does that deteriorate the quality, you think, of oversight or regulation that's being attempted at the state level, just the sheer volume of changes that are kind of being put forward all the time?
It's interesting too, because we have this whole like legalization of marijuana thing, and somehow that gets kind of grouped under what's happened in the craft beverage industry over the years. So when they're trying to come out with this, it's like, how will it affect us, or what did they do? And it should be a completely separate thing. So we do. I don't know.
Why is that? Do you think that they're even brought up in the same conversation? It makes absolutely no sense, right?
Well, I don't know. There's arguments on both sides of that. Why there's some regulation. There's some beverages that try to put CBD into the beverages, and although CBD is different, and so I'm not sure. I think that a lot of it, what it really comes down to, is consumer awareness, and that's another part of what NIWEA does. Actually, is we try to inform the consumer about what affects the wine industry, because oftentimes there will be legislation. For example, just right now there's a bill out to lower the BAC to 0.05, and so that would mean that you couldn't, a person like me, a woman my size, wouldn't be able to have a whole glass of wine with dinner and drive. And so that affects the restaurant industry, that affects the wine industry. But that legislation is coming from a place that doesn't really make sense. So that's, to your point, that's most of the injuries that happen that are alcohol related are not happening with people who are blowing 0.08, right. That's happening with people with way more.
Right.
And so to regulate us even more down to 0.05 would affect our industry. It would affect wine tastings and beer tastings. It would affect tourism in a big way. So now you have this legislation that's put out there saying, we're going to lower the BAC, but that regulates, again, puts another layer of regulation on our industry that's doing well. And so why do that? There are other things, that you can focus on. Another good example is right now there's a bottle bill out, and they're trying to make a deposit on, they're trying to propose that a deposit be made on wine bottles. But when you look at the statistics, and I just got off the phone with these folks from RIT that are actually hired to be the third-party researchers. So when you look at the statistics about it, wine bottles are being recycled. It's actually, the problem is more about consumer awareness of what contaminates the wine bottle and will make it end up at the landfill anyways. And so instead of getting to the core of the problem with the consumer who's the well-intentioned consumer who's putting it in their recycling bin, they're going to regulate the winery and say you need to have a deposit on your wine bottle, which is cumbersome. Administratively alone, it would be a huge job. So again, they're misguided regulations, but they're misguided. They all come from a good place. Everybody wants to try to help in some way, but I think in the end of the day, it's about being really educated about it and trying to consider it from the people that it affects the most. And so those are a couple of the issues, again, when we were downstate, we were talking about in Albany, but there's all those things coming out all of the time. So you really have to stay on top of it, and that's what we try to do as a group. It's all volunteer run, so It could be a big job, but
now obviously it's a statewide association. I'm sure you guys have folks from all over the state, but with Finger Lakes in mind specifically, does the Finger Lakes sort of bear a lot of the force and a lot of the brunt of these new legislative efforts that tend to pop up every year when it comes to regulation, given how much of an interest the Finger Lakes does have in the wine, craft beer, craft drink industry?
No, not Finger Lakes alone. It does affect the whole state. So there's no legislation out there that just says wineries in the Finger Lakes this has to happen with. It's always wineries in New York State.
Right.
So no, the Finger Lakes doesn't really bear the brunt of it, but because we are so concentrated, I feel that we kind of have a more unified voice, if that makes sense. Like I said, we meet every month, and when we meet, our meetings are big meetings. They're full of information. They have the kind of the players in the industry are present there. And And so we have communication with Wine America, which is our national kind of industry legislative representative, and then we also have ties with other people in other industry organizations that can't necessarily do lobbying efforts. Right. So I mentioned the Wine and Grape Foundation, but also downstate, there's like the Long Island Wine Council and things like that. So we try to keep communication open. Just recently we sat down with the New York State Brewers Association because there's some things like the .05, for example, that would affect them too. There's other things like there's a regulation where we're just finding out about it. We can't find the regulation, but it's being enforced regarding food trucks at wineries. And so if there's a food truck within your licensed premise, allegedly that's not legal. So that's not to say you can't have a food truck in your parking lot if that's not licensed or on the road next to your business. But the idea is that there's this kind of antiquated regulation that all of this stuff dates back to Prohibition. So one thing to keep in mind with wineries, especially the regulations surrounding them, is that it's an old business in New York State, whereas breweries and cideries and distilleries are fairly new. So some of the battles that this industry has kind of been fighting for a very long time are still kind of happening because the laws were made for our industry years and years and years ago. And so, that kind of law dates back to overlapping licenses. And even though the food truck is not necessarily selling wine out of the food truck, they're just doing food, what they say is it's an overlapping license. And so you're not supposed to do it. That's detrimental to some of these wineries. People, they have events, they want to have food, they want to offer food at and keep people longer and have another experience. And here we are saying that you can't do that. And so, things like that. There's also, there's so many, there's things that they do regulating as far as, labels and what you can and cannot say on a label and how a label is approved. I mean, a lot of that's done at a federal level, but depending on what your production is like, you can get into the state level of that. So it's nice to get out there and be the person that they call, so at least that, I don't have all the answers, but there are a lot of people in the group that have years and years of experience. And so it's easy for me to be kind of the funnel of information and then get it out to the right people that do have the answers in the history.
So a follow-up and sort of clarification on that last question that I just asked. I was more sort of curious, would the Finger Lakes, since it relies probably of all the regions in the state most heavily on tourism and on these different service industries, would it be most affected or hardest hit by these different pieces of legislation, which the Finger Lakes doesn't always have the strongest or the largest representation in Albany? Does that sort of go back to how hard the work is that you guys have to do keeping folks informed about the ramifications?
Yeah, it's hard to say the Finger Lakes would be the hardest hit because it's every region, there's 7 or so regions in New York State, has their own tourism businesses. They have their own little micro kind of influence in the state. The Finger Lakes is well known, and so I think you'd hear about it more. Right. But I'm not sure it would affect us differently than any other region.
So one of the items that you guys have been focusing on that we haven't talked about yet, the incinerator bill. Looks like we're getting word now that it most likely will be signed by the governor, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
Walk us through what that whole fight was like or has been like from your guys' perspective.
A lot of time. So a lot of meetings, a lot of time, a lot of showing up, a lot of, emails and letters and calls. So, again, we coordinate the effort. So yes, we're all individually doing this and then doing it as an industry voice from NIWEA's perspective. But, just kind of coordinating what our argument against it is and then making sure that we articulate that as a unified voice takes time. And so with the incinerator, we would never want to come out we would never want to come out and say something that the majority didn't agree with. So it's also communication within our membership. And so that's what it looked like for us. We did a lot of advocating against the incinerator and still have really passionate members that were like calling the governor's representative in Rochester every day. And he's like, I hear you. The last time I called him, he said, hi, Eric, I know what I said. No, actually, I was calling about something different. And so it's just a lot of time. And everyone, it's funny because everyone's like, I don't have time. I don't know how you have time to do that. And it's like, if you don't make the time to figure this out and to speak for yourself, then you can't complain when things happen. And so, that's part of the reason that I'm so involved in this organization. It's one of the most satisfying organizations that I'm involved in, is because you do see how when you have a voice, when you actually unify together and you come out with this package and present your opinion, it does make a difference. It really does. We've had some great wins as far as that goes, and we played a big part in the incinerator. If the governor signs the bill, we will be very proud of that. So.
What do you make of it? It's sort of rare to see, but almost universal opposition to something, especially something that has the word jobs tied to it. From your perspective, how surprising, or I guess to the opposite end, inspiring was that to see everybody sort of rally around the tourism industry and say, whoa, this is not a good idea for reasons A, B, and C?
I really wasn't surprised. It doesn't make any sense to put a giant incinerator in the center of the Finger Lakes, right in the heart of it. I was more worried than anything else, but happy to see all the meetings I went to. It was packed house, and it was all of my winery colleagues that, and it wasn't representatives from the wineries alone. It was owners and people that you don't always see. When you go to a trail meeting or something, you see marketing people and you see, whoever can kind of make it. And this was very serious right off the bat. Everyone took it very seriously. We understood that we couldn't let this go. If we couldn't let it go further, we needed to actually take action. So it was really coordinated, and we were happy to see it. You have to ask yourself too what direction the region as a whole is going in. And so it's been years and years and years, and you see the Finger Lakes wine industry become more prevalent on a world scale. We're going to China and doing tastings. We're in Germany. We're actually hosting a world conference for the region's the world's most influential wine people in Geneva this year. And so it's kind of a choice. Are we going to be a wine region or a craft beverage region? Or are we going to be a garbage region? I mean, you can't have both.
Right.
So, that's kind of where we stand, and we still stand today. We do still do a lot of advocating against the incinerator, because until that bill is signed, we're not out of it yet. So.
And to that end, there are also a number of landfills in the region, and of course, you guys are probably keeping the environmental side of the fight on your radar, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's really kind of we understand that it's hard for me to talk any further about it, because the incinerator is really the only thing we've come out as a group, right, as far as NIWEA goes. Now, as far as Three Brothers goes, if I have that hat on, Three Brothers is very committed to we kind of feel like we've been responsible as a region, and we've done our part. We've taken in as far as garbage goes, we've taken in what we need to take in, and it's someone else's turn to do that. And so we are very, my partners Dave and Luann have put in their complete livelihood into the business, and so I'm very, very, very intertwined into the whole thing. And so personally, for me, I need to make sure that the wine industry is what's thriving in the region, and not the garbage industry.
So let's talk about this wonky series of events that's been going down with ADA compliance and wineries' websites. Walk us through what that even is, because there's some people who are probably a little bit confused about what we're talking about. But walk us through what that is, and then what your guys' response has been to it.
Sure. So first, I should come off and by saying that we want to be ADA compliant. as wineries, we want to be, we want to make our winery websites the most accessible they can be to anybody and everybody. The problem has come with this whole issue is that there's no standard or regulation that says what ADA compliance is. So when someone comes, and a lawsuit comes down on a winery, I think there's a dozen of them in New York State right now, basically, that have been sued. Maybe more. I don't have that actual statistic, but so they basically get a lawsuit and they say, well, you can settle for X number of dollars or you can fight this. And we all know that it's going to cost way more to fight the lawsuit. But when you go and you say, okay, well, I got to get my website compliant, and I'm just putting this kind of, in everyday terms, you're like, where do I go? So I go online and I'm Googling how to make your website compliant, and there is no standard regulation. Right. And so that's what the issue is. So we can't be compliant because there is no rules. And so what has happened is our industry has been targeted, and we continue to get new lawsuits every week within the industry. And it's that story. They say, well, we'll take this as a settlement. Now, the other problem is if you settle, it doesn't mean that you can't get sued next year for not being compliant. So a lot of the industry has taken the stance that we need to do more. And so part of what we did in Albany this year is we talked to our legislators about it, and we said, hey, what can we get some kind of standard here or some window of time where we can make the adjustment so that we're being compliant once we're told what's not compliant. For example, just so everyone understands, it'd be something like when you look at your website that contrasting colors are appropriate, or that on a video there's subtitles, or even in your shopping cart that there's an ADA kind of widget that's attached to it that right. can help people who may not be able to see or hear navigate through the shopping cart. So that's perfectly fine with all of us in the industry. We just kind of need to know what it is, and it's been so confusing and kind of complicated. I know there's other industries that have been affected by this. It seems like they kind of pick an industry, target that industry, and then move on. And so when we were talking to people when we were in Albany, they didn't really know that this was such a huge issue. So that's one of the things where we're not only advocating for some kind of change, we're also educating on what's affecting our business. As a small business, there's no web department in our business, right. And so we're just trying to figure it out and be compliant. We're very used to regulations as wineries. We have the liquor authority and, TTB and all of that. And so we're very used to having to comply, but if there is no standard, that makes it really difficult. So that's kind of what we were doing with ADA compliance right now. It looks like it is there are a couple organizations that they also kind of want to get some kind of regulation, and so we're working together with them, and really we just make calls and send letters to people that need to help move the wheel a little bit. So that's what we're doing there.
And you guys also, you mentioned the liquor authority. You guys also advocate for some streamlining or some efforts to sort of navigate the process of the liquor authority for businesses starting, or I'd assume already right. running. Walk us through what you guys kind of push for on that side or hope to see. Well,
even from so Three Brothers came around 12 years ago. And so even over the last 12 years, I've noticed huge differences in the way the liquor authority communicates with the industry, and that's mostly due to us as a wine industry association, and of course the Wine and Grape Foundation and other organizations like that. But the line of communication, making it easier for us to get an answer, and then also once you get an answer, that's kind of because it'd be easy to call way back 10 years ago. You could call and get 3 different answers. And so, when you're talking to your peers and you are both trying to do the same thing and one of you got one answer and the other one got a different answer, it's kind of hard to figure out. So now it's just been so much better as far as dealing with the liquor authority goes. The communication is just more smooth. A lot of that has to do, again, with the Wine and Grape Foundation. We're really thankful for them. They did a lot of work on the back end there. there's also some licensing, the way you get licensed, and then the process in which you get licensed and the type of licenses you need. Sometimes there was some overlap that we try to just simplify and streamline. We'd still like more of that, streamlining. But I think the one good thing about these newer industries coming into the region that are craft beverage is that they kind of clean it up a little bit in a way that if they get a streamlined license and it makes sense, it's easier for the liquor authority to see that also makes sense for another like winery. So that's really the advocating we do with the liquor authority. And right now there's nothing major that I can think of off the top of my head that we're really communicating with them about.
So you mentioned earlier getting out there, making a difference, sort of being part of these issues and being part of the solution, whether you sort of think you have the time or not. The balancing act, obviously, day job, sort of these I don't want to call them a side hustle, but all these things that have a role in what you do during the day. How do you balance all of the different things that you're trying to be involved in?
Well, for me, I am in a good position because I do it for work too. So a lot of the organizations that are kind of a crossover from my day job and my community involvement are really benefiting the winery too. So in a way, I do a lot of it during the day, when I'm at work. There are some other organizations that it's just a kind of an evening or weekend thing. I'm really involved with the one that's on top of my mind right now is Geneva Community Projects, because we do the Rosé Soirée. We put that on every year in Geneva, and that's kind of totally volunteer side thing. I started a podcast because I wanted to talk more about business and marketing related things with the industry. That's a seasonal thing because wineries are not seasonal as much anymore, but you do find yourself a little more time in November through March. So you got that going on. It's really just your priority, I guess. It is so important to be a part of the voice. I am a strong believer, and so is my partner Dave and his wife Luann. You can't complain if you're not helping, if you're not talking and you're not actually part of the conversation. And so it's just an investment we made in our business. And so as far as balancing goes, it's kind of something we all buy into.
So crystal ball, 5-10 years from now, what does the Finger Lakes wine region look like compared to what it looks like today? Exponentially larger, roughly the same size? What kinds of things do you sort of living in the industry, working in the industry, what do you sort of see as a future?
I don't know about the size and scale, because there is a lot of there's wineries that are going in and wineries that are going out, and the same with breweries and all of that. So there's a lot of opportunity to buy something or to sell something, but as far as building, it's kind of I think we'll slow down a little bit because we've got a lot of them here. But I do see, and the most exciting thing is just the influence and the notoriety around Finger Lakes wine. And so even, again, 12 years is not a long time for us to be in the industry, so I'm speaking kind of from a fairly new perspective. But 12 years ago, when I would say the Finger Lakes winery, or we're in the Finger Lakes wine industry, you get this kind of like, they only make sweet wine, or they only do this, or it's out there, and now you say it and it's like world-class Riesling. It's, wow, you guys are doing great things for the community. And so I think that that's only going to become more and more, over the next 5 and 10 years, you're going to see that the wine industry is really how invested they are. And it's not to say that they weren't before. I just think it's the consumer perspective that's changing and will continue to change. And, we'll continue to kind of grow outside of the region. So with the kind of the growth of the wineries and the industry in general, you'll be able to see more wines available in Cleveland, Ohio, and Washington, D.C., and California, and all over the place. There are a few producers that are doing it well now. And a lot of it goes to regulations again, who you can sell to, what states you can move things to. But I think as things loosen up a bit, you'll see just more notoriety to the region and more visitation. So as long as we can keep protect the lakes and protect the natural beauty of the Finger Lakes, I think that people will value it more and more. And so, we're living it every day. But when I hear every day people come into the winery and talk about how lucky we are and how beautiful it is here, and I live with a view of the lake, and I tell myself sometimes, like, I'm living on Seneca Lake here, and so even when we talk about going on vacation, me and my husband, we're talking about going to the Adirondacks, and we're talking about, we can go to this house on the lake. And I'm like, we have a house right here that we're on a lake, that's beautiful. Yeah. And so it's just appreciating kind of where we are. But people do see the value in this region. And so I think that it's, as any business owner, not just our industry, but it's our duty to kind of protect it and be a voice to guide the region to a direction that the majority wants it to go to. Everyone's not always going to agree. Everyone doesn't always agree in the wine industry either. But we have to talk with the majority unified voice, and that's what we do as far as NIWEA is concerned.
All right. Appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.